Welcome, my friend. So this is this is the first time, literally, I just pressed the record button, right? And so we're actually, so for the people that are watching, this is like the first time that we're actually talking. I know,
pretty much, yeah.
Yeah, I know you through Johannes and in the guild that's happening over there. And my understanding is that you are, well, a couple things. Johannes has mentioned you a lot, right? Sounds like you guys have been friends for quite a while.
All good things, I hope.
Yeah, totally. And then my understanding is that you're in the process of getting your PhD under Hegel. So you're a connoisseur of Hegel.
Under Hegel, I wish. Well, it's on Hegel for sure. Yeah.
And now you're getting ready to actually teach, and I believe this is the case. You'll be the first one to teach a course in the Halkyon guild that other than Johannes, so that you're actually going to be teaching a course, and it's an introductory level course to philosophy, right?
That's right. Yeah, introductory and intermediary. Yeah.
Sweet. So welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, on channel.
Glad to be here.
I've been looking forward to getting to know you. I watched both of your videos, right, with Johannes going through Hegel and going through, I think it was logic. And it's interesting because I had never really personally opened up Hegel before with any kind of seriousness. And so going through and reading it, there was kind of a moment in reading Hegel, especially the logic, where I was like, oh, there's something going on here with him that it seems to be deeply unique. Like in terms of like a pure kind of philosophical thinking, right? And I just kind of got this sense of like, oh, if I were to step into that, I may not ever come back out. There was that kind of feeling of like, that's a whole world that if I step into Hegel and I truly kind of like go in this dialectical movement and this whole, what seems like a whole world that opens up, right? With its own horizons. And I don't even quite know exactly what's going on with all that, but just this sense of a world. I was like, okay, I hadn't sensed anything like that since I opened up with Heidegger, right? Which is somebody I've been pretty consumed with for a number of years. So I'm curious about
I think great philosophers tend to do that to you. They tend to be pretty overbearing and consuming.
Yeah. Well, speaking of consuming and overbearing, I'm just curious, how did you come about getting into philosophy, and how did you come to this?
Well, it's kind of randomly, I guess, from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I was on a very different path like 10 years ago. I was in trade school and I started an apprenticeship as an electrician. So I was, pulling wires 8 hours a day and, sort of had my life set and got a profession and everything.
Yeah.
But I discovered we had like this really quirky teacher who taught us what's called a society course.
Right.
And he was like an art critic at a high school. So he was like in the wrong place even for himself, but he would walk around with a wine glass and have coffee in it. But he was somebody who was like very eccentric, and he engaged us in getting interested in the politics and philosophy and so on. And shortly before that, I discovered Nietzsche just on my own, by chance, online, and started reading it. And then through this interaction with this teacher, he sort of inspired us to keep on doing more philosophy. So
Mm.
I did a presentation for him on Nietzsche, which went spectacularly bad. I completely froze. I was out of my depth. Like it was bad, and I got a miserable grade. But he had sympathy with me. But the seed had been laid. Like the thing about philosophy, it had taken root. And then 6 months later, I did another presentation about Voltaire, who I was also interested in at the time, and I got an A on, and it went fantastic. So that's sort of how philosophy started for me.
Yeah.
But I was at the wrong place because I was at a day job, but that had nothing to do with philosophy.
Yeah.
So I spent most of my waking life not thinking, and this set its marks on me. And I eventually decided, after reading philosophy in my spare time, that I'm going to go to uni and study this stuff. I'm going to go full time on this.
Wow.
So that's what I did. So I'm from Norway, but I went to study undergrad, do my bachelor in Canada. So it was like completely new environment. And, for me, it was like falling in love being there.
Yeah.
Because you get exposed to so many different philosophers.
Right.
I read Kant for the first time, Spinoza, Wittgenstein, and lots of different things, and eventually Hegel. And more and more, these things, they just build upon themselves. And it's like when you're doing any kind of skill, right? As you progress, you spend more time, you get better at it, and that allows you to get into more deeper levels, and so on.
I'm curious when you
by the end of it, and by the end of it, it was like either I go, for the full way, I do the PhD, and at that point I knew I would do it on Hegel, or I do something completely different.
Right.
But given my own experience, it was really insightful.
When you said something striking about, so basically what I'm getting is you were on your way as being somewhat of a normal citizen. You found you found a trade. You were geared up to go, right? Electrician, using your hands, right? And then something happened that then took root, called philosophy. What is the thing that exactly, and I'm really curious about this because I'm not exactly clear about what philosophy is, although I'm consumed in it in most respects. But it seems like philosophy is always a question, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe if it stops being a question, it stops being philosophy in some regard, right? But I really get the sense, and I've heard this from a lot of people of they're going along and life's one way, and then something happens, and then there's this thing called philosophy that kind of takes over their life, right? What's the thing that took root exactly? What was the difference between life before that and life after that had you change total directions, right?
I'm trying to think and remember. So on one side, I think it's the cliche questions, like, why are we here? What's the world made of? Does it go on eternally? Does the world has a beginning and end, and so on, right? I think those have their place, and I think those things speak very viscerally to you, because you haven't yet picked up the skills of philosophy, and you haven't learned the techniques and what history is and what the philosophers are, but you still have this sense that you want to know what's going on. You want to know how things hang together. And you also want to know about yourself, like how you orient your own life. Like why is it I value this so much, or why is it that this gives me fear, or why do I place so much importance on that? And at the beginning, I think these things, you feel them, these sort of skeptical issues, you feel them as an experience upon yourself. So I think that's how it was for me, that I was genuinely just curious
Yeah.
And I felt like my mind was just opening and opening,
Yeah.
and like reaching for the what would later become more specific questions. But at the
Right.
beginning, they were the cliche basic questions.
Yeah, totally. So basically, kind of it tickled. It sounds like the way it hit you is it opened up questions that seem to be inherent in being human, right? And there is
Mm.
something about like when you turned towards it and you started looking at like taking on them philosophically, that they kept opening. The questions that kept opening. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that strikes me about philosophical conversations and questioning and all the reading is strange. It is a strange of how I guess as Heidegger would talk about it, like human being is the being for which its being is a question, right? So it's just that there's just something about you cannot be a human being for which that there is anything at all, right? Isn't already concern for us. So that's one of the things that's interesting about philosophy is that on one level, people usually think about it as this kind of academic, right, intellectual pursuit. But in some sense, it's always struck me about like I've been continually impressed with how deeply near philosophical questions are and what philosophy does. And one of the things I've noticed is that the more I go into it, the more I kind of, in some sense, abandon myself to these deeper questions. That the more the practical everyday life starts to illuminate, like everything, right? Everything's at stake in these questions, right? And so it's very, very practical on one level, but it's also very, very almost mystical in a mystery at another level, right?
Yeah.
So is that
could always say like the mystery is infectious, right?
Yeah.
It seeps into all the things you do. Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you get? Why Hegel? There's a lot. There's a lot in that laugh. I'm looking forward to hearing what's in that laugh.
Well, it is a laugh now, but it wasn't always a laugh. So I remember there like over the course of my bachelor, I discovered new insights, new ways of thinking, and so on. But I also discovered despair like I hadn't before, because you're challenged so much in philosophy, right? And you're challenged to the point where you don't even know what truth is anymore. Like, is there really any truth? Can you be certain about anything?
Yeah.
And this is generally a frightening experience. And you might take a course about some guy, and they present an argument, and it seems like it just takes the wind out of your sails and the ground beneath your feet.
Yeah.
You just lose the sense of meaning altogether. And I remember having several episodes like that.
Really?
But I think of them now as like growing pains. So so it's like when you're learning guitar or something, right? Something is physically changing on your body.
Yeah.
The skin on your fingertips gets harder, or when you're working out, your body is actually changing, and you feel fatigue, the day afterwards. So stuff like this also has its own counterpart in the intellectual pursuits.
Right.
Yeah. So that as a preface, I think these experiences help you to find your own courage regarding how you can challenge your own ideas, what you think is right, and be a better thinker, in the sense of you're not committed dogmatically to any position. And then I thought that somebody who really matched this dread, this despair, this skepticism, and took it head on, I found to be Hegel.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah.
Because he is somebody who does not shy away from error, contradiction, negativity, failures, but he incorporates those things.
Yeah.
That is the vehicle of his philosophy.
Right.
We progress through mistakes, through failures, through going beyond ourselves, through things being too much, and so on. Yeah.
One of the things I got in a conversation with Johannes about actually is him going into the recent course that he just put on with the German idealists, right? One of the things he said that really struck me, and he said this specifically about Hegel, he's like, how much letting go has to do with the dialectic, right? Of that there's this, and I think I just heard that of whereas I kind of got the impression, whereas with Kant, right, there wasn't so much a letting go, there was like keeping the, you know, the presuppositions in front of you and some kind of holding on. But with Hegel, it's like, no, let it go, it'll come back transformed, but like a sense of letting go. And I think I heard that in what you just said.
Yeah. That's, I mean, that's definitely part of the courage you learn in doing philosophy, is to let the things you take to be true and the things you take to be sacred and guiding your life, you have to also be able to at points let them go, because that is how they show their strength to you.
Right.
Yeah, and Hegel speaks explicitly about letting go at the beginning of his Science of Logic. He you know, he speaks of his way of thinking as that of letting go, letting the concepts, the ideas, giving them free rein and let them develop on their own. And what we as thinkers do, we look on and we observe.
Yeah.
Much like, you know, people studying nature, right? We're not interfering with the thing, we're letting the thing do its own thing and show itself to us. Like, how does this animal behave? How does this plant grow, and so on.
Right. That's a really radical, I think for a lot of people, that's a really unusual way to think about thinking. Right? Of like, in some sense, let's let it go. Let's observe it, right? Let's watch how it moves. And it sounds like Hegel, that's one of the things that's striking to me about Hegel, is this, I guess, this sense of movement, right? In the dialectic, right? This kind of sense of that something's happening that you can watch, right? You can observe. And because I think that most people think about thinking is that they're the ones thinking, right? And that like the idea of like observing your thought or discovering what you think, right, is kind of a strange idea, right? Because it's usually on we kind of have this idea that we own our thoughts somehow.
Yeah.
So is it true that Hegel really had that? Because it does seem like that's striking about Hegel to me.
I think that's striking about
thought.
It is striking to Hegel, because he, I think, makes it so explicit and puts his finger on that thing so much. But I think it's a common thing throughout a philosophy.
Yeah.
So Descartes, for example, he had his head meditations, right?
Yeah.
Where let's pretend we're doubting everything, and see what follows from that.
Yeah.
So the practice, I think, has always kind of been in philosophy. I think just Hegel brings it to a new level.
Right.
So I guess we can introduce the distinction that the German idealists like to make between picture thinking and thinking.
Yeah.
So I assume that when we like to think that, oh, we're the ones thinking, I'm the one imagining things and so on, right? That's all fine.
Yeah.
But what philosophy is interested in is what is universal in the thinking. What is that universal element? What is that, I don't know, the rules of thinking, the patterns of thinking, the structures, which give rise to thinking in the first place.
Yeah.
And through which thinking itself makes itself intelligible to itself.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So we are explicit about what we're doing, a sort of we are self-conscious about it, what's involved in that?
Yeah. Totally. And and that's the phenomenology part too, right?
Well, in which sense do you mean? I mean phenomenology,
well, just the sense of
generally, or
the famous das, because it's like because Hegel was the first one to really use the word phenomenology in a kind of a rigorous way. Isn't that true?
no, I would say Kant is the one who sets that off.
Right.
But he makes clear that, well, if we cannot know anything about noumena, the thing in itself, then let's not talk about it. I mean, phenomenology is where it's at. And Fichte and Hegel sort of pick up on that, and then later on you have Husserl and Heidegger and the 20th century existentialists who are all about that. But yeah, Hegel has his take on that, for sure. Yeah.
Right. In that specifically, just thinking about that notion of, I really heard in what you're saying about like, well, this self-transparency to thinking, right? Of that. Well, what is it that this, I guess it's that sense of phanestas, right? The shining forth, right? From itself as itself, right? And that and the movement of intelligibility in some sense is it strikes me, it's like it's already moving because it already has in view some sense of a self-transparency. And I think one of the things that's trippy to me about that, one of the things I like about my understanding of Hegel and a lot of kind of phenomenology is this kind of way of like, there's a way where it's like you can kind of observe this deeper ground that you're already encountering, and you're in a movement of intelligibility that you can then perceive. And I've been struck with how much, and my understanding is just reading a book by Heidegger recently about basic questions, where he was talking about the notion of in pre-Socratic early Greek, the notion of thinking was much more about perception. It was more of a sense of like thinking was less of an activity in one's head and more about seeing, right? It was more about the sense of thought was more about, it was like in the world and that you can see it. So thinking was more about an encounter with seeing. And I think that's one of the things I kind of hear also in Hegel in a certain regard, right? Is this way that you can kind of see the movement of thought. You can see things light up in their intelligibility and follow that movement, right?
Yeah.
And track it and be struck by it in some sense.
Yeah, well, it's very much with us in our own language, as we use it. When somebody says something, and then you reply, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Or like, I'm having difficulty grasping this thought.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the physicality of talking about thought is I think they're still with us very much today. But that also, I think, is part of the challenge, because thought isn't manifesting itself physically, right?
Yeah.
It isn't something we dig up from the earth.
Yeah.
And this is the challenge of running throughout the philosophy, is that we're trying to talk about what is essentially kind of invisible, right?
Yeah.
We can perceive glimpses of it, but it's not obvious.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to us immediately, right? It doesn't just drop off from the sky, because if we knew what it was about, we wouldn't be doing it, right? We would just have it, but we don't. We start at a level of ignorance or of confusion or in darkness, right? And but there is some sense that we're being propelled forwards and something is guiding us in some direction, right? But yeah, it is this difficulty of we're not starting with the full truth. We're starting in with what is most immediate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that quality of just what you're talking about, the mystery in the beginning. You're talking about the mystery that's infectious.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of find myself being quite moved by that, right? Often. In some sense, I notice it's like when that sense of the mystery or the uncanniness of things, right, is not there. I'm kind of like, I use that as a good sign of I'm not quite totally leaned into things correctly, right? Like, unless that sense of uncanniness or that sense of like the strangeness of reality, because things are just so strange, like in such a deep level, and not even like not in a fantastic sense of the word, but I think their strangeness lies in that just the fact of the most simple, the things that are most near to us are so extraordinarily mysterious, right?
Yeah.
And in some sense, it's and I appreciate this and what I'm hearing you talk about, of like kind of how you came into philosophy in some senses, through these deeper questions that allow this this mystery to reveal itself. But that thing about concealment, right? That in some sense we kind of, part of that seems to be we find ourselves already here, things intelligible to us, yet we don't exactly know why, right? It's not
Exactly. Yeah.
right. Like, in fact, most of it, when you start to look at it, like most of it's concealed, right? That's one of the things that's striking to me, right?
Yeah.
And so in some sense, I noticed for me, and I'm curious about this for you too, it's like working with philosophy and reading and meditating on it is, in some sense, I've noticed the consequence of that for me has been this kind of fundamental attunement to that things are concealed, right? That most of the stuff, like that, there's much more of a sense of being aware of, like, most of the truth, as I understand it, is about that there is something that self-conceals itself, and that's part of the way things are here, right? And in a certain sense of an attunement to that that self-concealment itself is similar to the way that the mystery, I find, it makes itself present.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It reminds me of like what I would call the weirdness or the funkiness of philosophy, is that once you're into it and you work hard at it, and then you grasp, an idea or something, you come to realize what I've already been doing this thing before I started doing it. Before I started the activity of philosophy, I see that now that I've always been philosophizing, just like when you're, investigating, examining concepts or how intelligibility comes about, you realize, well, you've always been doing it.
Yeah.
Right. It's been part of your world. It's been part of your access to the world and your repertoire of going about, doing your day-to-day business. So this is the weird sort of almost like, backward looping that philosophy sort of does to you. Is when you come to sort of see the truth of something, you see that, well, I've always been with the truth, even when I didn't know I was.
Yeah. And
that
always.
And so then,
I like the word that you use, the funkiness of it.
Yeah. And so a large part of philosophy then becomes also understanding not just how things become explicit, but also how then things become implicit. How do they, as you say, conceal themselves, make themselves into, things that just are immediate or solid or congealed.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the thing. I think one of the, I can kind of hear it in my own, like in the movement of just this conversation, or like it as well, is I've often had a hard time talking about philosophy, because I noticed that, like, for me, when what I think about philosophy, in my experience of philosophy, and like how deeply it's affected me and impacted me, right? is not when I use the word philosophy out in the world, people don't have that same picture, right? And I think one of the things that I've been felt moved to emphasize, right, is precisely that kind of transformational part of philosophy, right?
Yeah.
Of that it's not that, like I would imagine, and this is the sense that I got with Hegel, and this is really how when I came to Heidegger, I did not understand a word that I was reading, but I could tell that there was something opening up on the horizon that was strange that kept me reading,
Yeah.
right? And I realized, like, years later, kind of coming to and realizing, oh, very funny. Like that was the whole point in some regard, right? Is to go on this walk of, especially with Heidegger, there's like stepping so far outside of one's own frame of reference to try to understand what he's saying. That exercise is like this kind of yoga move of some kind, right? And then you walk away and you realize that you're seeing differently, or you're thinking differently, or you're perceiving differently.
Yeah.
And to me, that's the hard thing to bring into language or to get understood, is that there's this practice element, it seems to me, in philosophical understanding. That on one level, there's like, you're kind of absorbing what the philosopher is saying, but then there's like what it takes to understand what he's saying, in some senses, to transform your own mind, right? And that's the part that I see doesn't kind of get shown a whole lot, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like a prerequisite. Unless you transform your mind, you don't get what the philosopher, he or she, is saying, right? Because they're imparting, new knowledge or a new method or what have you, right?
Yeah.
And if it was easy and obvious, it wouldn't be weird and interesting.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't be some discovering in something that was worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So I like to think of doing philosophy as learning a language, right? Yeah. When you first start out, it looks weird, right? You don't know the words, the terms, what they mean, where it's going. The whole sentence structure, the grammar is off. And when you try to learn it, you fumble around, you fall, you make mistakes, you don't have the whole picture. But as in learning a language, you learn through mistakes, you learn through failures, and little by little, it starts taking a life of its own inside of you.
Yeah.
Right? Because you have facilitated that kind of life to emerge within you, like when you're learning a language. Right. So when you grasp, the contents of a difficult philosophy, a great philosopher, you start living in their almost like atmosphere, right? The way they were thinking and seeing things, and that becomes a moment of you now, right?
Yeah.
So at points it's all consuming, right? Because you do have to put in the work, the effort. This is not easy stuff, right? Yeah. It's like physics, right?
Yeah.
But then there comes a point where it becomes second nature, and it becomes just as like picking up an instrument and you're playing, and then you leave it behind and then do something else. But it's still informing you and with you, even when it's not.
Right. Totally. That second nature part, and that kind of transformation of one's interesting. I think that's one of the things that as I look at getting into Hegel and reading Hegel, it just seems like Hegel specifically, I can't imagine. Well, I know it's interesting. Johannes, I know, talks about, did you guys go to school together?
Yeah, we went, well, I'm still doing the PhD where he finished his PhD.
Oh, okay, got it.
So we're both at University of Warwick.
Because he talked about being, I don't know, spending 4 years on the first paragraph of Hegel with a particular teacher of some kind. He's just mentioned that a number of times.
Yeah. I've done that course myself 4 or 5 times. Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like for you? Like, what was that course, and like, how did that? what was your experience of learning Hegel and learning to think in that way, and how did that affect you? And
Well, for me, it was a much more pleasurable experience than I think it was for most other people,
yeah,
because I had already read commentaries by that teacher, and I was already committed to Hegel. I was enthused by Hegel. I was like hungry for concepts.
yeah,
So,
huh,
so for me, it was an absolute delight
right,
being there and
yeah,
having the wisdom trickle down.
yeah,
So. It wasn't well. It's still difficult because I mean it is dense and technical material.
mhm,
That's part of the challenge and the excitement of it as well.
yeah. And you're and then and how's it going? Like getting your PhD now? Like where are you in the process? Like have you written your thesis? Are you just defending it now, or like how's all that going?
So I'm drafting the last chapter now.
Mm.
I've got most of the materials that I want to have,
Mhm.
but then you need to go through like a editing process with a fine comb
Yeah,
and
fine tooth comb.
really like
Mhm.
go through it with a laser.
Yeah,
So it's a long, laborious process, but I'm getting
yeah,
towards the end of it now. Yeah.
yeah,
And the way I feel about the PhD is that it's a gateway, it's a stepping stone. This is just the beginning.
yeah.
I think that after having done a long project, 3 or 4 years in philosophy, that you achieved something.
Mhm.
No, you're just starting out.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
Right back in the beginning. What is this?
yeah.
What is your plan in terms of what's after the PhD? What does that set you up for, and how do you see yourself going forward as a philosopher, if that's what you consider yourself?
Tough question. I mean, job-wise, is a bit of a mystery, right?
Yeah.
As
Yeah.
pandemic hasn't been kind to academia, I think things were difficult enough as it were. But
Yeah.
for me, I love philosophy,
Yeah.
and that love has only grown, become deeper, and
Right.
this is what I want to keep on doing.
Yeah.
So, and I enjoy discussing with people, with you, and
Mhm.
teaching the thing. Like,
Yeah.
because I remember in my own experience, like how inspired I could become from my teachers. And
Yeah.
if I can give a fraction of that to others, I feel like this is a good life. So
Right.
doing philosophy, teaching philosophy. I mean, this is
Hmm.
what I
Hmm.
want to do. Yeah. Basically, just keep on doing what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And that the course that you're getting ready to do at Halcyon, right?
Yeah.
Because you've done, yeah, I know, I saw a little video that Johannes posted right after I believe you came and did a. It was supposed to be an hour and a half or 2 hour process, and it ended up being like 3.5 hours or 4 hours. And like Johannes was just like, his eyes were dilated almost. And he's like, I just came out of the process, and this is philosophy, and he was so inspired. And I think it was the course that you actually taught. Um,
No, I think this was the final seminar of the German idealism
yeah,
course,
yeah,
which
and
was on
that's the one that
Hegel.
you led, right?
Well, I was participating very much in it, but
Mm-hmm.
Johannes is the one
Right,
who's leading the course. Yeah.
right, right. And so you're going to be coming in and doing this introductory course, right?
Yeah. So this is a course titled "What is Philosophy," and
Huh?
it's basically about the stuff we've been talking about here today.
Yeah, yeah,
So more specifically, it's going to be about what is philosophy,
yeah,
how is it different from social sciences, natural science, mathematics? Is there other concepts, methods peculiar to philosophy, or can we just do maths about and statistics about everything, right?
yeah, yeah. Right.
Does philosophy offer an approach that nobody else can do?
Mm-hmm.
And so it will be about how philosophy informs our lives, but also how we will be looking at the tradition, how philosophers and the history of ideas and so on been developing. I mean, it's a discussion that's been going on for at least 2,500 years, and we'll be trying to enter into that party.
Yeah. So in some sense, it's almost, it sounds like a course that's designed to possibly provoke an initiation in some sense into the deeper question that is philosophy, and to open that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to realize that it needs to be asked again and again, because philosophy is a living discipline, right? It's not something you can just write down and put away. It's and even then, people need to read it and understand it. And you never know. You might suddenly think that there's something missing here, or that, well, what about this, or what about that, right? Thought keeps spontaneously finding a new things, new problems, new concerns with regards to itself.
Yeah. I'm struck with just the sense of that thing, the finding, because there's, what a lot of people would, a lot of people listening, if you've probably noticed, most of, so much of philosophy is philosophers talking about other philosophers thinking, right? And kind of that, I'm just so struck by that sense of that there's some movement of intelligibility that seems to happen through philosophical thinking that is finding these things to spring up on, or these kind of open problems that were left unaddressed by the previous philosophers. That this movement, right, of I think Heidegger calls it a certain kind of history, right, or the movement of this intelligibility. I don't know. I get so I think I'm just so amazed is that there is something like that happening, right? Like that there's something that I think, like you were talking about, that there was something that we're swimming in. That on some level, all I've ever done is enact out this intelligibility, but then I learn about it and I read about it in philosophy, right? And all of a sudden I wake up to what I'm already underway in, this kind of already always swimming inside of this intelligibility. I don't know. There's something about that. I can't seem to get over that, how tripped out I am about that. Right? That you can kind of find yourself, you can come to already underway, already in the movement of the intelligibility of, like, say, one of the things that, Heidegger talks a lot about is this kind of sense of gestel, right? And kind of seeing how this one mode of revealing that is this kind of hyper technocratic way of understanding being as a calculatable and frameable point to optimize, and that everything starts to kind of line up that way and show itself that way. I remember just kind of getting that, like in my early days of grappling with Heidegger at the Barnes and Noble, right, while I was in art school, and just starting to kind of get the outlines of that and realize, like, oh my God, he totally outlined the way everything's organized. But nobody's taught, but it's not like anybody's walking around talking about it explicitly. So in some sense, there's this sense in the way, this is where I think I'm talking about, there's this kind of strange way in which philosophy has more to do with perceiving, right? So in some way, this is one example of this is like where Heidegger comes along and he kind of is able to somehow see this deeper context, right? Or movement of intelligibility, or movement of history, if you want, and be able to name it. But it's naming what's already there in some regard, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So he makes explicit what a bunch of people take just to be implicit, right? They think that, they rule their lives by it, right? And then he sort of shows you in intelligible terms, philosophical terms, what it is about, how it hangs together.
Yeah.
But then I think he also goes the extra step by showing that, well, is the hyper technological quantitative being, is that itself understood through itself, right?
Yeah.
Because if it isn't, then there is something more to it.
Yeah.
There is more to being than this.
Yeah.
This might be a moment of being, but it's not all that being is.
Yeah.
Because if it were, then I wouldn't be able to make sense of it.
Yeah.
So my sense making is itself something that is already hinting, anticipating something more at work than, what people take to be just going on about them.
Right. Right. That right there,
and this sense making, this self-developing rationality, this is, I think, the common thread through all of philosophy. All philosophers are looking around themselves and trying to make sense of, how ordinary people think, how people go about their lives, but then also think that, well, how does this fit into a bigger picture? If this is all there was, would this structure work?
Yeah.
Presumably no, there is something more. And then it's our job to then also explicate that.
Yeah, totally.
So Hegel says that philosophy is something about perceiving or seeing one's own time in thoughts.
Yeah. Seeing one's own time in thoughts.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. Seeing one's own time in thoughts. Yeah.
So there is some temporality, there is contingency, there's history involved. We're living now, not 100 years ago, and the people from 100 years are going to, live their own thing. But then this element of thought is also something that this, intelligibility itself is itself something self-developing and going across time.
Right.
When just as we can go back to Aristotle, Anselm, Aquinas, Nietzsche, and really get at what they were getting at, and that this can help us make sense of our time, then other people can in the future come back to our time and pick up our intelligibility.
Yeah. And even the sense of like that we can, as you're talking about it, there's we can actually we can somehow bring to bear this sense of a future, right? Of somebody's going to look back at this time and they're going to see something that is inherently concealed, right, to us. And this is one of the things I'm kind of struck by is like, and we can somehow, you and I can somehow talk about this awareness of that in the future, they're going to look back on us and they're going to be able to see what's concealed to us. But then us, like, and so, but then we can kind of take that and just start to look around. Well, what is that? Right? You and I can sit here and have a conversation and be like, well, what is it that I don't know that I don't know? And I don't know that I don't know it. And it's even concealed in me asking this question.
Yeah.
That there's, see, this is where it gets really slippery, right? But like, but that sense of overhearing and catching a view of the structure of intelligibility and then responding to it, right, in its actual movement, right? Like what you just said of that sense in which, someone like Heidegger can come along and see, oh, gestel, oh, but that I'm even just able to perceive it means that there's something more than gestel. So I overhear that. Well, what is that, right? That it has me, I can't not want to look at that, right? Well, what else is there? And that opens up a new horizon, right?
Yeah.
Of thought. We start to look around that. So that, I think, if anything, like that, what is it? It's like being open to that kind of, that level of concealment. I think that's what we're talking about a bit, of like having a relationship with what is most concealed to me, but in a way that's not at war with it, right? It's not, and it's also not trying to not have it, right? It's also not trying to reveal everything. But there's a way in which I think one of the things I like about philosophy is that all the good stuff is in that world. Like your relationship to that thing that you can't quite see, that's concealed in its obviousness, yet you can have a relationship with it, right? And bring it into being. That horizon seems to be what kind of animates appearance with this mystery. It seems to be so meaningful, right? To me. And I would imagine, so like if I'm you, right, and I'm right, I'm just imagining kind of coming as a teacher of philosophy, right, and especially as somebody who's gonna kind of like literally like teach a course, an introductory level to philosophy. So imagining being at the what that means to introduce that to somebody. Like what else would you want to do? Like I'm just kind of, I think I'm present to the awakening part, that sense of awakening, the awakening of philosophy, this kind of opening your eyes to this whole other realm that had been there the whole time, that you just hadn't seen it. Yeah.
I think the ideal here was discovered pretty early by Plato in Socrates, right? Because for him, he saw himself as a midwife, somebody who helps to to give birth, right? To guide the process of thinking, that it may discover itself, gain new insights, develop new concepts, and so on. He really didn't see himself as the one doing it. He looked for it in others, and he wanted to bring it out through his method of questioning and an argument and so on.
Right.
So I mean, the ideal of philosophy is kind of like got set pretty early. It seems to be, or late, depending on which scale you use.
Right. And that kind of that Socratic. I mean, you just brought up there that Socratic sense of midwifery, of listening.
Yeah.
That, because I think one of the things in what I do, I think what philosophy and grappling with these questions is it's working with people in groups and being a teacher in that way. Is really, for me, has opened up the ability to really listen to people, like at a level that's really, really, it's hard to describe in what sense that is, because it's like, because most people think about listening to somebody and they just think about it's that polite thing that you do of not talking until they're done, right? You don't talk until they're done with their statement. But one of the things I think that I didn't notice about in reading Heidegger was that walking through these arguments, right, and being in time and grappling with that in some sense, what it took to hear these deeper philosophical movements and these horizons that fall back into concealment that you can start to hear is actually what people are doing all the time, right? That like you can start to hear somebody talking about their lives, and there's a way where if you kind of listen philosophically, right, to them, that on some level you can hear through what they're saying into the as Heidegger, as Heraclitus would say, it's like, do not just listen to me, but instead listen to the logos, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
That's what you're listening to.
And that you can kind of start to hear not just what the person's saying, but this horizon of intelligibility, right? That they may not explicitly, most likely don't even explicitly know about. Yet the fact of their speaking is already in a response to. And so listening starts to become this thing where you can start to hear that horizon. And then when you start to, one of the things I notice is that when you start to hear that and then respond to it, there is this quality of like, you kind of start to point at that or respond to it with them or point that out. And as you start to say that, and they'll do things like, oh my God, I've never been as deeply seen or heard in that way. But it's not really anything that they really said. In fact, oftentimes it's the exact opposite of the thing that they said, but there you can start to hear these ways in which the human being is always in a response to these things, right? So there's kind of a level of like with this, and I've just come to appreciate that as a teacher, right? Of kind of giving birth to this kind of listening or this kind of seeing. And so I'm all that to say, just like that sense of just appreciating, the position that you're in right now of like, you're kind of just finishing up your PhD, like you're at a new beginning and you're coming out of academia and then you're stepping into the Halcyon Guild, getting ready to teach and possibly opening up this world to other people. I mean, I guess I want to ask you just like, what is that like to be at the precipice of that's what you're about ready to step into? What is that like for you?
I feel like it's gonna be like it's been before whenever I stepped into a new world in philosophy. That I think like going back to when we talked about these various different philosophers. On the face of it, it looks like it's just individual people saying their thoughts, right?
Yeah.
It's Nietzsche, Spinoza. They're saying their opinions. They're saying their thoughts.
Right.
But if you look deeper into what they're saying, then you see that they're actually contributing to a larger conversation.
Yeah.
Spinoza isn't Spinoza without also, Descartes being there, without Aquinas, without Plato, without Aristotle.
Yeah.
And all of them are intertwined in this grand dialogue, which kind of, if you abstract away the individuals, it's really just speaking with itself. It's intelligibility making sense of itself. And as philosopher, you see that this is going on all the time through other philosophers. So you have to be a good listener because you don't know where self-developing reason is going to crop up next. Where somebody is going to have a good idea, where somebody is going to see something nobody else has seen before.
Right.
It's a duty and a delight of a philosopher to really be in tune and listen well to what other people are saying, because you don't know if, as they say in the Odyssey, if the stranger who comes to visit is a god in disguise, right?
Yeah. Totally. That listening, that deeper sense of listening. I appreciated just the way that you said that, like that deeper, these ways in which there's a greater movement of intelligibility. It's just not the individual philosopher speaking. And one of the things I got present to as you were saying that was just this way, and where, that's right. It's like, in fact, everybody is swimming in that all the time, right? And they don't need to know about it to be swimming in it. However, if you can hear it, right, and you can hear what people are responding to and respond to it and perceive it, that seems to give something, right?
Yeah.
It seems to give something that's quite exciting.
Yeah, we don't want to just live, we also want to live well.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think the understanding of what it is we're swimming in is itself kind of ecstasy that I don't think you find anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's like the ecstasy of the mysterious,
Right.
where the concealment unconceals itself before it conceals itself again.
Yeah.
And this is how, like, again, on the surface, it looks like a bunch of individuals having, you know, opinions and whatnot. But really what they're talking about is this greater conversation. And so it's something universal. The universal thing is itself in development through these individuals.
Yeah.
But this doesn't efface the individuals. It doesn't efface their own voices. It's actually a strange coming together between the universal and the singular.
Yeah.
The individual historical lived beings
Yeah.
and the bigger eternal process, the thing they're swimming in and others are swimming in.
Wow, it's interesting because it's kind of like one level, it's you get into that conversation, like the one in the many. That's like one of the most original philosophical thoughts, right? Is this
Yep,
the way
and
the
ongoing.
one and the many, right? The particular. So in some sense, you can almost see it. I just heard that right there. I never quite saw it like that, of this way, where you're right. It's like Spinoza speaking in this way is in some sense responding to what it's swimming in, but there's this way in which, to the degree he's uniquely particular, right? It's almost to the degree that he see explicitly and implicitly elucidates, right? The what he's swimming in, right? Of in its suchness and its moreness, right? That comes together. That is that quality, like, and so I just saw that. I appreciated the way that you put that. Is like that's in some way the movement of the way being questioning itself as philosophy, right? Exemplifies itself in enacting philosophers in a community of philosophers, right? Ongoingly. Yeah.
The, you know, what we're swimming in needs to be expressed, but that expression is always through a particular individual with his or her lived experiences, and they find their voice in the universal, just as universal becomes expressed. Right. So it's a kind of mutual activity going on. This goes into like Hegel's big dictum that substance is subject, right? If we want to speak about what we're swimming in, well, we have to speak about it from, you know, using our terms, our expressions, our languages, and they're going to be different from time to time, from person to person. So I think that also that's what gives it the kind of beauty. Right. Yeah, this might also mean that, you know, as far as philosophers are concerned, there is no like universal as universal. There is only the universal as it is particularized, as it is in and through individuals.
This starts to get into just some thoughts about, you know, I know there's been a lot of discussion as of late about, you know, I'm curious about for you too, in this point in your life of kind of going through academia, stepping into, for example, the Halcyon Guild, right? With Johannes is just officially went like philosophy can't happen in academia, or it can't happen in, right? It's very difficult to do that, or it's not given that if you take up philosophy through academia, that you're necessarily going to have a very like authentic encounter with it. And I think like, so there's this kind of, and what I hear in that is, and now I don't come from academia. My experience personally with philosophy is just kind of through, just I stumbled on it on my own. And in some sense of just, thank God for the internet, because it's like that's where I started to actually meet people, right, that have read the same books. But for a while, I was the only one like reading the books in Barnes and Noble, right, grappling over with them. So I don't really come from that background, but I do get the sense that there seems to be some kind of there's something going on with the move of the role of philosophy and its role in the culture in the world right now. I'm just curious about what you see, like having just been in like still in academia, right, and coming out of it, and especially kind of coming and doing a course in a guild, right, that's in some sense a response, right, to taking on philosophy. What are your thoughts about all that, right?
Well, first of all, my experience in university and academia has been largely positive, right? And I think that is because I consider myself lucky by having had great teachers who are like authentic with regards to philosophy, but they're also good teachers in addition. So I've had too many of those such that my experience of academia has been good. Of course, not always, not all times has been well, but then this comes down to the individual teachers, whether or not they are good teachers or enthusiastic about what they're doing, like they're just treating it as a kind of menial job.
Right.
But then I guess part of your question is also like about the institution, right?
Yeah.
Because philosophy, it's not always been institutionalized in the way it's become in modernity. And I can definitely see some difficulties there with regards to like almost arbitrary pressures that are just put onto you. Like you need to do publishing, you need to do a bunch of like services for the trade, like, and so on. And these things don't necessarily lend themselves to your own thinking and your own development.
Yeah.
They can be obstructive in that sense. So it's a difficult thing. I'm not sure. I'm really not sure about that because I see pros and cons of both sides, right? On the one hand, university or like philosophy departments should be a place where thought is given free reign, right? Academic freedom and so on.
Yeah.
And yet on the other side, there are these arbitrary constraints that are just there just to keep like tabs on numbers. Like they're just having like a numbers game between themselves because for whatever reason, the universities need funding or they need to attract students. And what better way to do that than to make things quantitative, put numbers on things.
Right. Totally.
Which is kind of very disappointing because it's philosophy and I would think philosophers tend to be the ones who are like very self-critical of standardizations.
Yeah, totally.
Totally.
Yeah, it just seems like just a movement of just institutions in itself. It strikes me as inherently, again, this is not from having a bunch of academic experience, but like it just strikes me as that like it seems like philosophy is genuinely philosophy when it puts itself in question, right? It's always in question on some level, right? So it seems on one level it's constantly disrupting itself. Right. It's the thing that can't be standardized on some level. It probably hides itself in its standardizations, right? It's so tricky but there's that. It's just interesting to think about this, like, and that's one of the things I've just appreciated about the guild and Johannes's work and being a part of it, and in my own way of what I'm doing with circling and my channel, is in some sense kind of discovering the ongoing experience of discovering what it is that we're responding to, right, in a philosophical way, in a deeper way. It's a constant receding horizon, but it's also one that that seems to necessarily be mysterious, right?
Yeah. So it's a kind of it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's you never just reach a point where it's, oh, okay, the mystery is solved.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
So I like institutions. I think they're good. They can be good places, but then they can also be bad. I think when philosophy stops disrupting itself, that's when there's a danger on the horizon.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
it takes itself for granted. It says, oh, well, we have this system, this standardization, this, we'll just like keep on things doing. This is what it is. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
However, institutions being good and all, of course, we don't know where self-developing reason is going to take off next.
Yeah.
Maybe it is the internet,
Yeah.
because this internet's still pretty new in terms of our civilization.
Yeah.
It's still it's like useful phase, I think.
Right. Right. Absolutely. Well, what I have to start to come to a completion with this in terms of time, but when does enrollment open up, or when's the final call for enrollment for the class that you're doing?
So enrollment is open.
Mm-hmm.
I'll provide you a link, and then people can probably go down into the description and have a look at it. I think the enrollment closes on Sunday or Monday, so fairly soon.
Yeah.
But maybe I can ask Johannes to keep it open a bit longer. And then we kick things off next weekend.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Yeah. All right, my friend, it was nice meeting you.
Yeah, it was really nice meeting you too, Guy.
This is awesome.
I really enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. All right.
We should have another one.
Yeah, let's do it.
Check in with each other. How's Bean going? How's Bean doing?
Exactly.
how's the mystery?
Exactly. All right, my friend. Take care.
Thanks for having me on.